EV Hub Live is a brand new video podcast for public policy professionals working to advance transportation electrification. EV Hub Live is recorded live, so to tune in and ask questions or check the schedule, please visit atlasevhub.com/live. Your host, Nick Nigro, founder of Atlas Public Policy, will be talking to Jimmy O'Day from the Union of Concerned Scientists and Kathy Kinsey from NESCAUM about the significance of recent policy developments aiming to achieve 100% zero-emission truck sales by 2050, namely California Air Resources Board's new Advanced Clean Trucks Rule and the MOU signed by 15 states supporting the rapid electrification of the medium and heavy-duty vehicles sector.
All right. Thanks a lot, Peter, and welcome everyone to EV Hub Live. This is episode 1. This is kind of a long time coming for us at Atlas. We've been talking about doing something like this for a while, and so it's a bit of an experiment, so we'll see how it goes. And thanks to Jimmy and Kathy for being the first, our first guests. So I'm going to turn right to Jimmy just to get right into it. So this rule from the Air Resources Board, from CARB, can you give us a 2-minute overview on what it's going to do?
Yeah, great to be here, Nick. It's a fairly simple rule. So it is a manufacturer's standard that requires a given percentage of truck manufacturers' sales to be electric, battery or fuel cell, in California, beginning with model year 2024. It applies from everything from Class 2B trucks, so like your F250 pickup trucks, all the way up to your Class 8 semi trucks, and there's different standards for different categories of trucks. The overall impact will be about 15% of trucks on the road will be zero emission in California by 2035. Sales percentage wise, cumulatively, it'd be about 6% of sales the first year in 2024, which is about 4,000 trucks, about 33% sales in 2030, and 60% of total sales in 2035. Three, main takeaways about this rule. It's first of its kind. It's a big step towards truck electrification. But the second main point is that's really just one step. Certainly not the first policy towards truck electrification, nor the last. We have a lot of work to do to get the other 85% of trucks to be zero emission that this policy doesn't achieve. And the third point is really just where this policy started to where it ended up. The final policy is roughly twice the stringency of the original policy. So really through tireless work of a lot of advocates, many who I'm sure are on this call, got this policy to be a lot stronger than it originally was.
So a lot of us who have been working in this space for a long time would think of it like the Zero Emission Vehicle Program, the ZEV program for light duty. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's different? Because it sounds pretty different. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, ZEV for trucks. I guess high level, they are similar. So that is a big takeaway. The main differences are that this policy goes through 2035. So, ZEV, of course, flatlines at 2025. Of course, conversations are beginning to happen, regulatory actions to update that policy. But ACT goes through 2035. The other big difference is there's not the same level of adders and multipliers with the credit system that the ZEV policy has. And I think CARB, learned lessons from that policy, and the result is there's a lot more certainty in what ACT will achieve, whereas ZEV has this 22% target on a credit-based system of electric cars by 2025, but that really achieves 8% of sales in 2025. The ACT will be much more one-to-one in what we expect the policy will achieve.
So Connor is our moderator on the Q&A side of things with Teams, and so if you have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A, and we'll try to fold it in as we're going on through the discussion. one thing about the ZEV program from the light duty side that made it very successful, in my opinion, at least, is the number of states that have participated in it. So how much does California depend on other states acting to enact similar rules to this truck rule for them to succeed? Can they be an island, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, legally, California can be an island. Practically, no. Practically, they can't. California is, so I'm in California, great state, love being here. But, we're 10% of the vehicle market. And if this truck rule will get 15% of trucks on the road in 2035, that's 1.5% of trucks in the US. I'm not a subscriber to California exceptionalism in the sense that we need all hands on deck for this, air quality and climate change. And as much as California can drive the market on its own, it can't do it all. So we really do need the work that Kathy and all these other states are doing to get where we need to be.
Love you mentioning her name because I want to bring Kathy into this conversation. So Kathy, you are at NESCAUM, you all are helping spearhead that work of these other states that we're alluding to. Can you give us a quick couple-minute overview on the MOU that came out just after the rule was released?
Sure. And hello, everyone. And thanks, Nick, for having me. It's great to be here to talk about this effort in its early stages. So this medium and heavy duty effort really is building on an earlier effort, multi-state effort that we facilitated around light duty vehicles. Back in 2013, the governors of 8 of the ZEV states signed a memorandum of understanding to work collaboratively together to accelerate consumer adoption of passenger trucks and cars. And that MOU directed the formation of a multi-state ZEV task force and the development through the task force of a multi-state ZEV action plan and the implementation of that action plan ultimately by the participating states. And NESCAUM was very involved in that process. We facilitated the MOU, in that case, the development and execution of the MOU, and we led the task force effort to develop the action plan. And it has been a very successful model. It's a good model for states to use to work collaboratively on transportation electrification issues, to take a state leadership role, especially now, given that we have an absence of federal leadership, on these very important policy issues. And so this medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU looks very similar in most ways to the light duty vehicle MOU. It has what I consider to be 4 key elements. First, there's a commitment by the signatory states to work collaboratively together to, build a self-sustaining market for medium and heavy duty vehicles. Second, it sets sales goals, sales targets, 30% ZEV medium and heavy duty sales by 2030, and 100% sales, as I think you mentioned earlier, by 2050. Third, it places a lot of emphasis on disadvantaged communities and deployment of passenger trucks and buses, electric trucks and buses in areas and in ways that will directly benefit disadvantaged communities that are, many of whom are located, near trucking corridors, trucking hubs, ports, other distribution centers, and are disproportionately impacted, by harmful air pollutants from diesel truck emissions. And so, NESCAUM's role in this effort with the medium and heavy duty is going to be very similar. We facilitated the development of the MOU and the execution of the MOU, and we will lead the task force efforts in developing the action plan. And then once that is finalized, we will then support state efforts in implementing the action plan.
It sounds like you really have your work cut out for you. I want to bring Jimmy back into the conversation because you mentioned underserved communities, and for all of us working deep in this field know that they are disproportionately affected by emissions from the freight sector, and in California in particular, Jimmy. So can California really make sure that Black and brown communities are the first and really not the last to benefit from this rule.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly takes policies like this to lead that transformation from diesel to electric trucks. This policy on its own won't get us where we need to be, where communities need to be. And I guess a unique thing about this particular policy is it targets truck manufacturers, and really 10 truck manufacturers are subject to this rule, give or take. It doesn't say who has to buy these vehicles. It doesn't say where they have to be deployed, because you're regulating manufacturers. There has been a lot of work in other CARB policies, namely incentive programs, and what we're hoping is in CARB's next big policy around fleets. So actually requiring truck fleets to buy electric vehicles. That's where we can really target, geographically, communities that are most impacted by pollution.
So speaking of pollution, are there considerations that relate to local air emissions versus greenhouse gas emissions? For a lot of people, this is a climate challenge, and for others, it's a local air challenge, and for many, it's both. So how does the rule deal with that?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I'm certainly of both. That we're really so far past overdue, on action on both, air quality and climate, that we don't have much time to spare in doing one or the other per se. And just the investments it takes, if you're going down one technology pathway that would only get you one, air quality or climate, is a big investment in and of itself. So if you are willing to make investments to, if you're a fleet, to buy, electric vehicles and charging infrastructure, to me, that's a much better long-term investment than, say, natural gas, where you probably don't have natural gas today. There's some air quality benefits, but pretty limited climate, and a big effort to make that transition from diesel to natural gas.
Kathy, from the MOU side, what climate was most certainly a driver for you, but from the states, how does you strike that balance between, dealing with local air emission issues and climate and greenhouse gases?
Well, so the MOU is, really is an effort to address both, and the air quality issues and the public health issues and the benefits, the air quality and public health benefits that, are possible to achieve with electrification of this segment of the transportation sector were, equal drivers really for many of the states. And so it was an important, underlying factor in the state's support for this effort and their decision to participate in it.
So getting back to the timing of this, was there, did you all knew obviously that that CARB was going to make a decision about this rule at some point? Was it a coincidence that your MOU came out right afterwards, or what? Could you give us a little bit of the inside story on that?
Well, I don't know if I have much of an inside story on that, actually, but actually, the task force states started talking about the need to develop a strategy on medium and heavy duty several years ago when we were working on updating our light duty vehicle action plan back in 2017 and 2018. And, we signaled in the updated action plan that we finalized back in May of 2018, our strong interest in expanding our effort into the medium and heavy duty sector as well. And so, as the MOU process, evolved and began to develop, it ended up dovetailing very nicely with the ARB development and ultimate adoption of the ACT rule. And so I guess I would say a little bit of both, a little bit of coincidence, and not too. So
Jimmy, starting to look ahead a little bit, can you tell us about the importance of how you see this MOU process evolving and where you see CARB going with its next steps? You mentioned a fleet rule. Could you give us a look ahead?
Yeah, well, maybe just a very quick look back on the MOU and just its importance in giving CARB, the support to go forward with a strong rule. So that, there were states, NESCAUM supported, CARB at the first hearing that they had on this in December, where, CARB presented what we would call a pretty weak ACT proposal. And then several states came and spoke individually at the June meeting that just happened, supporting CARB for their actions, indicating that, they're interested in electric trucks. And that gives CARB a lot of cover, for lack of a better word, that they're not, on an island doing it by themselves, that there is a lot of momentum. And, the biggest pushback on this is from the truck manufacturers. And for CARB to fight them by themselves is one thing, but for CARB to be there with several states saying, hey, we're right behind you, we're not even behind you, we're lockstep with you, that's a big deal. So yeah, looking forward, this fleet target, this fleet rules are the next big activity at CARB on electric trucks. So CARB, as part of the ACT, they laid out in the resolution targets for truck electrification, 100% on-road targets. So they laid out drayage trucks, the trucks that take cargo from ports to warehouses, all electric on the road by 2035, which is pretty soon when you think about truck turnover. Refuse trucks, local delivery trucks, all electric, battery or fuel cell on the road by 2040. And so that's where these fleet rules are actually going to put the regulatory details and enforcement to what CARB has laid out in these kind of visionary goals.
So we did get our first question in from the audience, and it's about underserved communities, and those who are disproportionately affected by emissions from trucks. And so the question is, why was the announcement and coordination of the announcement done mostly by traditionally white-led environmental groups? And what are plans from you all's perspective in ensuring that other groups who are focused on equity have a stronger voice in this conversation?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, no getting around, the issue of differences in resources and how groups are funded and resourced across, the electric vehicle, policy landscape. The ACT had a very broad coalition. There was 25 plus groups across the state working in support of a stronger rule. And part of that were many community groups that played, I would say, a very large role in pushing CARB past the original proposal. And that came most poignantly through public comment. In the December meeting and the June meeting, members from community groups came out in large numbers saying, this affects me. We want these trucks in our communities. It's long overdue. And hearing those messages from people directly impacted it is infinitely more valuable than hearing it from, me, who crunches numbers and, does, looks at spreadsheets all day. So I guess I do want to say that these groups did play a big role in pushing CARB. But yeah, acknowledge that there's pretty disparate power dynamics that results largely from funding between traditionally, large NGOs and community groups.
Kathy, could you speak a little bit from your perspective with the MOU, and how do you ensure that smaller community groups, NGOs, have a seat at the table or are really a part of the process?
Sure. So the first thing we're going to be doing as a sort of first and very important step in the development of the action plan is stakeholder outreach, and disadvantaged communities, environmental justice advocates are very high on the list of outreach, key stakeholder groups that we plan to do outreach to. And so we are in the process now of developing an outreach plan for all of the stakeholder groups, and we intend to do very robust outreach to the disadvantaged communities and communities of color, and to reach out directly to EJ advocate organizations and community advocate organizations, not just at the national level, but also at the local level, at the state level, in each of the signatory states. So that is going to be a high priority right out of the box.
Great, thanks. So I want to step back a little bit more and talk about the states that you have in the MOU. It was notable that, maybe Peter, you could pull up the map. It was notable that some of the states that were in the MOU are not ZEV states. You know, you've got Hawaii in there, you've got North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. So could you tell us a little bit about how that came to be? How did you get a bigger tent, if you will? And then a question from our audience is about the process by which you might be recruiting to get additional states to come into the MOU.
Sure. So we issued a statement of intent back in December. As a first step in this MOU process, the environmental commissioners of 8 states and the District of Columbia we released a statement that memorialized a multi-state commitment to develop the MOU for approval by governors, and that was actually announced at the December Act hearing, ARB Act hearing. And so I think it got a lot of attention, and it drew a lot of interest on the part of states. This initiative is, not based on a ZEV rule. And I think that, the opportunity to address not just climate, but address air quality and public health issues through this electrification effort resonates across the board with states, whether they're ZEV states or whether they're not ZEV states. And so there has been a lot of interest in this MOU. And in terms of, the opportunity for new states to join, that opportunity is open. We would welcome the participation of additional states at any point going forward. And so we are very open to that, and we are hoping that additional states will actually join this effort, because the more states that we have participating in this effort, the more impact we're going to have across the country.
So speaking of across the country, let's switch back over to California. And Jimmy, tell us a little bit about things that we should be paying attention to as the CARB takes its next steps with the rule, other initiatives that are freight related within the state. I know there's a multi-jurisdictional effort going on to electrify I-5 for freight. Could you tell us about more things we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I guess maybe one big one outside of electrification is the low NOx rule that CARB will be considering next month's board meeting, that would lower the NOx emissions from combustion vehicles, which will also have a big impact, not necessarily towards electrification, but air quality. There's certainly big numbers to come out of that. This fleet rule, I guess I keep going back to it because it will be the next big one. And we expect that process to be one that takes us beyond that 15%, 2035 on-road number through these other policies, and also to target, vehicle classes that we know do impact communities disproportionately, like drayage trucks. That process will, go through workshops. Hopefully in the next month or so, we're expecting one from CARB, maybe another one in the fall. That will be opportunities for anyone that is, listening and watching to engage in that public process.
And Kathy, could you share a little bit more about what you guys see coming up in the near future in this area that we should all be paying attention to?
Well, I think, one thing is, the state consideration of adoption of the ACT rule. I mean, once California's rule is final and fully adopted, our states, our ZEV states, the NESCAUM states that have adopted the rule, and other ZEV states will be giving consideration, and the MOU states will be giving consideration to whether or not to adopt the ACT rule. And so that is something to be looking for, something important. And on the MOU front, we will be engaging in a very robust stakeholder engagement process going forward over the next month or so. Initial round of stakeholder outreach.
Great. So any closing thoughts for the audience before we wrap it up? Kathy, you can go first.
I think this is a lot more challenging than light duty vehicles. Electrification of the medium and heavy duty vehicle sector is complicated. It's much more complex. The market itself is more complex. You have a lot of commercial fleet owners that don't even own their own trucks. They use service providers, which leads to a whole series of other complicating factors. The infrastructure costs are, much greater. The vehicle costs are greater. So there are a lot of challenges around electrification of this sector. And I don't think anybody has all the answers right now. I think that, we are going to have to all together, all stakeholders, roll up our sleeves and, really work together to try to find solutions to some of the bigger challenges. And we're looking forward to doing it. I mean, I think we've got to get started. The sooner the better. These trucks are on the road for a long time.
Yeah, and it's a quick plug for all the folks who've been working on the vehicle technology parts of this market, because having worked in it for 10 years, I don't think I would have expected us to be talking about battery electric heavy duty vehicles at this point in the development of the technology. So it came on fast, and it's going to come on faster, I think. Jimmy, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, I think to your point that we'll look back in 10 years and think that we could have gone faster. We'll be surprised at how far we'll have come. I think just like with the California's, the light duty ZEV policy that has kind of flatlined right now with its impact in driving the market forward beyond what it's already done. I think we'll see that with the ACT, that they'll reach a point where it will flatline probably before it runs its course. So I'm optimistic about technology. It's going to take more than just California. And one thing we haven't talked about, we've talked about other states, but we haven't talked about federal action, which there's been very little, action. We, don't have any incentives at the federal level for electric trucks to speak of. That's a big deficiency that I hope changes.
Great. So we're just about at time, and I want to thank Jimmy O'Day from Union of Concerned Scientists and Kathy Kinsey from NESCAUM, along with our producers, Peter and Connor from Atlas. This was our first episode of EV Hub Live. Really appreciate you all joining us, and look forward to an episode from us in August. We'll probably do an episode on the market from Q2, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you have ideas for shows, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at atlasevhub.com, and we can talk about doing an episode together. Thanks again, and stay tuned.